The telegram crumpled in Clara's trembling hand as the Arizona sun beat down mercilessly on the empty train platform. Changed my mind. Don't come. You're not what I expected. Those 9 words destroyed everything, her future, her reputation, her last hope. At 26, abandoned at a frontier depot with $12 to her name, Clara Jennings faced a choice that would either destroy her or forge her into something stronger than she ever imagined. Friends. This is a story of rejection, transformed into redemption of a woman who refused to let humiliation define her destiny. Stay with me until the end, and please comment your city below. I'd love to know how far Clara's story has traveled today. The wooden planks of the Copper Creek Depot platform creaked under Clara Jennings' boots as she stepped down from the train, her traveling dress dusty from 3 days' journey across the territories. The September heat of 1883 Arizona pressed against her like a physical weight, making the dark wool of her dress cling uncomfortably to her skin. She smoothed her hands over the fabric, trying to present herself properly, despite the circumstances, despite the sweat already beading at her temples. Her trunk containing everything she owned in this world landed with a solid thud beside her feet. The porter, a weathered man with kind eyes, tipped his cap to her before climbing back aboard. The train's whistle shrieked once, twice, and then the great iron beast lurched forward, leaving Clara standing alone on the platform as it disappeared into the shimmering heat waves that rose from the desert floor. She clutched the telegram tighter, though she'd already memorized every cruel word. Thomas Whitaker, the man who had courted her through letters for 8 months, who had painted pictures of a life together on his mercantile empire in Copper Creek, who had sent her the train fare and promised marriage upon her arrival, that same man had sent this message to arrive just minutes before her train pulled in. Miss Jennings, the station master. A thin man with spectacles perched on a hawkish nose approached her with obvious discomfort. I'm Jacob Flynn. I have a message from Mr. Whitaker. I've already received his message, Clara said, lifting her chin despite the humiliation burning through her chest. She held up the crumpled telegram. Flynn's face reddened. Yes, well, he wanted me to tell you that he's arranged a return ticket. The eastbound train comes through day after tomorrow. Day after tomorrow? Clara's voice came out flat, emotionless. Inside her mind raced through the terrible arithmetic of her situation. $12 to her name. No boarding house would take an unchaperoned woman with such meager funds. No respectable establishment would hire her without references, and she had none here, having burned her bridges back in St. Louis to accept Thomas's proposal. He said, Flynn cleared his throat, looking everywhere but at her face. He said you weren't what he expected, that your letters had misrepresented certain aspects of your character. The words stung like a slap. Clara knew exactly what Thomas meant. Her letters had been articulate, opinionated, filled with thoughts on literature and politics and the changing world. She'd foolishly thought he appreciated her mind, her spirit. But men like Thomas Whitaker didn't want wives who could think. They wanted pretty ornaments who could host tea parties and keep quiet. Where might I find lodging for 2 nights? Clara asked, forcing her voice to remain steady. Flynn's discomfort deepened. The Imperial Hotel is the only respectable establishment, but it's $20 a night. There's Rosita's boarding house on the Mexican side of town, but it's not. That is a lady like yourself. I understand. Clara understood perfectly. Rosita's was where the saloon girls stayed, where fallen women found refuge. 2 nights there would destroy whatever reputation she might salvage from this disaster. The platform had cleared now, leaving her alone with Flynn and her trunk. The sun blazed overhead, and she could feel perspiration gathering at the nape of her neck, making the pins in her dark hair loosen. She must look a sight travel-worn, abandoned, pathetic. Thank you for your assistance, Mr. Flynn, she said with as much dignity as she could muster. If you could direct me toward town, I'll make my own arrangements. Flynn gestured vaguely toward a dusty main street visible beyond the depot. Straight ahead, miss. The Imperial is the 3-story building on the right. Whitaker's Mercantile is across from it, but I suppose... He trailed off, realizing the thoughtlessness of mentioning it. Clara bent to grasp the handle of her trunk, but it was heavier than she remembered. The 3-day journey, the lack of proper meals, the shock of rejection, they all conspired to sap her strength. She managed to drag it a few feet before having to stop breathing hard. Allow me. The voice came from behind her, deep and steady like distant thunder. Clara turned to find a man standing in the shadow of the depot overhang, though she couldn't fathom how she'd missed him before. He was tall, perhaps 6 feet, with broad shoulders that filled out his white cotton shirt. His face was weathered but handsome in a rough-hewn way, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of sage honey. Everything about him spoke of hard work and open spaces, from his worn leather boots to the calluses she could see on his hands. "I can manage," Clara said automatically, though they both knew it was a lie. "I'm sure you can," the stranger said, stepping forward into the harsh sunlight. "But there's no shame in accepting help when it's offered freely." Something in his tone, respectful but matter-of-fact, made her step aside. He lifted her trunk as if it weighed nothing, hoisting it onto one shoulder with an easy grace that spoke of physical strength earned through labor, not leisure. "Ethan Cole," he said, extending his free hand. "I own the Double C Ranch about 10 miles north of here." "Clara Jennings." She shook his hand briefly, noting the rough warmth of his palm against hers. "Though I suppose you already know that along with everyone else in this depot." A slight smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Small towns and train platforms aren't known for their privacy." "Where am I taking this?" Clara hesitated. She had no answer to that question, no destination that wouldn't result in either bankruptcy or ruin. Ethan studied her for a moment, and she had the unsettling feeling he could read every thought crossing her mind. "When did you last eat a proper meal?" he asked suddenly. The question caught her off guard. There was breakfast on the train this morning." "Railroad breakfast doesn't count. Martha's Cafe is 2 blocks down. Best chicken and dumplings in the territory." He started walking, still carrying her trunk, leaving Clara no choice but to follow. "Mr. Cole, I appreciate your kindness, but you've had a difficult day," he interrupted gently. "A meal won't make it worse." Martha's Cafe turned out to be a small establishment with checkered curtains and the aroma of fresh bread wafting through the door. The interior was blissfully cool, with a handful of tables occupied by townspeople who all turned to stare as Clara entered behind Ethan. Whispers erupted immediately. "That's her, the one Whitaker rejected. Came all the way from St. Louis, I heard. Too educated for her own good," Thomas said. Ethan set down her trunk and pulled out a chair at a corner table, his movements deliberate and unhurried. "Martha," he called to the plump woman behind the counter, "2 specials, and tell these gossips to mind their own business." Martha, a motherly woman with graying hair pinned in a bun, bustled over with coffee. "Ethan Cole." "I'll thank you not to tell me how to run my establishment." But she shot warning glances at the other patrons, who gradually returned to their own conversations. "Though I suppose you're right about the gossips. Pay them no mind, dear," she said to Clara, her voice softening. "Tom Whitaker's a fool, and everyone knows it." Clara wrapped her hands around the coffee cup, grateful for something to do with them. "You're very kind." "It's not kindness, it's truth," Martha said bluntly. "That man wanted a China doll to put in his fancy house, not a real woman with thoughts in her head. You're better off." "Martha," Ethan said quietly, "the food." "Coming right up." Martha patted Clara's shoulder before heading to the kitchen. Clara found herself studying Ethan Cole as he added sugar to his coffee. His hands were indeed calloused, with a thin scar running across the back of his left hand. His shirt was clean but worn mended carefully at one elbow. Everything about him suggested a man who worked his own land, who built his life with his own 2 hands. "You don't have anywhere to go, do you?" he asked suddenly, his sage honey eyes meeting hers directly. Pride warred with honesty. "I have a return ticket for day after tomorrow." "That's not what I asked." Clara set down her cup carefully. "No, Mr. Cole. I don't have anywhere to go. I burned my bridges in St. Louis to come here. I have $12 to my name, no references, and by now everyone in Copper Creek knows I'm the woman Thomas Whitaker found lacking." "What did you do in St. Louis?" "I was a governess for the Ashford family. Before that, I taught at a small school." "You're educated, then." "For all the good it's done me." Bitterness crept into her voice. "Apparently it's one of my many failings." Ethan leaned back in his chair, studying her with an intensity that should have been uncomfortable, but somehow wasn't. "Can you cook?" The sudden change of subject made her blink. "Yes, of course." Keep house manage accounts. I managed the Ashford household for 3 years. But, Mr. Cole, why are you— Martha arrived with 2 plates heaped with chicken and dumplings, green beans, and cornbread. The aroma made Clara's stomach clench with hunger she hadn't fully acknowledged until now. Eat first, Ethan said. Then we'll talk. Clara wanted to protest, but the food was too tempting. She took a small ladylike bite, then nearly moaned at the flavor. Before she knew it, she was eating with an enthusiasm that would have horrified her finishing school teachers. Ethan ate steadily, occasionally glancing at her with that almost smile playing at his lips. When their plates were empty and Martha had refilled their coffee, he leaned forward. I have a proposition for you, Miss Jennings. Clara's spine stiffened. She'd heard about men who preyed on desperate women who offered arrangements that were nothing more than dressed-up prostitution. Not that kind of proposition, Ethan said quickly, apparently reading her expression. I need a housekeeper. My ranch is 10 miles from town. I've got 6 hands to feed, and I'm tired of my own cooking. The job comes with room board and $40 a month. That's very generous, but there's a separate cabin for the housekeeper, he continued. It's small but clean with its own lock. You'd be cooking, cleaning, managing household accounts. Nothing more unless you chose it to be more. The last part hung in the air between them, loaded with possibility but not pressure. Why? Clara asked. You don't know me. I could be a terrible housekeeper. I could rob you blind. You could, Ethan agreed, but you won't. I'm a good judge of character, Miss Jennings. Have to be in my line of work. You're educated, you're capable, and you're in a difficult situation through no fault of your own. I'm offering you a respectable position and a chance to figure out what comes next without the whole town watching. And what do you get out of it? Decent meals and clean clothes, he said simply. A house that doesn't look like a barracks. Maybe some intelligent conversation in the evenings. My ranch hands are good men, but they're not much for discussing books or ideas. Clara studied his face, searching for signs of deception or ulterior motives. She found only a straightforward honesty that was somehow more unsettling than cunning would have been. What would people say? She asked. An unmarried woman living on your ranch. They'll say what they're already saying, that you're unconventional. Might as well give them something real to talk about. His expression grew more serious. But the cabin is separate. The hands will treat you with respect or answer to me, and Martha here will vouch for my character if you need references. He's a good man, Martha said, appearing as if summoned. Took over the Double C when his father died 5 years ago. Works harder than any man I know, treats his employees fair, and never said an unkind word about anyone who didn't deserve it. You could do worse than work for Ethan Cole, dear. Much worse. Clara looked from Martha's earnest face to Ethan's patient one. The alternative was 2 nights at Rosita's, a humiliating train ride back to St. Louis, and throwing herself on the mercy of relatives who'd made it clear she was becoming a burden at 26, too old and too particular to find a husband. When would I start? She heard herself asking. Now, if you're willing, I've got supplies to pick up, then we can head to the ranch. You can see the place, meet the hands, look at the cabin. If you decide it's not suitable, I'll bring you back to town tomorrow, no questions asked. It was fair, more than fair. It was a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman, and Clara knew she'd be a fool not to grasp it. All right, Mr. Cole. I accept your proposition. He stood pulling out money to pay for their meal. Just Ethan is fine. We don't stand much on formality at the Double C. As Clara rose to follow him, Martha caught her arm. Don't let that Whitaker fool make you think you're less than you are, she whispered. Some men can't handle a woman with spirit. But others— She glanced at Ethan's broad back. Others know that's exactly what they need. Outside, the afternoon sun was beginning to slant toward evening, painting the dusty street in shades of gold and amber. Ethan lifted her trunk into the back of a weathered wagon, then offered his hand to help her up to the bench seat. His touch was brief, respectful, but Clara felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the desert heat. As they drove through Copper Creek, Clara caught sight of Whitaker's Mercantile, a grand 2-story building with elaborate window displays. Through the glass, she glimpsed Thomas himself, a portly man with pomaded hair, arranging goods with fussy precision. He looked up as their wagon passed his face, going red when he recognized her. Ethan didn't slow down, didn't acknowledge the man at all. But Clara saw his jaw tighten slightly, the only sign he'd noticed. You knew, didn't you? she said quietly. You were at the depot specifically to meet me. I was at the depot to pick up supplies, Ethan said. Meeting you was unexpected. But you knew about Thomas rejecting me. The whole town knew before your train arrived. Thomas made sure of that. His hands tightened on the reins. He wanted everyone to know he'd rejected you, not the other way around. Wanted to make sure his reputation as a discerning gentleman remained intact. And yet you offered me employment. Ethan glanced at her, those sage honey eyes unreadable. Maybe I don't like seeing anyone kicked when they're down, or maybe I really do need a housekeeper. Does it matter which? Clara considered this as they left the town behind the road, stretching into open country dotted with saguaro cacti and scraggly mesquite trees. The landscape was nothing like the green hills of Missouri she'd left behind, but it had a harsh beauty that appealed to something in her spirit. Tell me about the Double C, she said. Ethan's expression softened slightly. It's been in my family for 20 years. My father started with a handful of cattle and a lot of determination. Built it up to about 500 head before he passed. I've got 6 regular hands plus seasonal workers during roundup. The ranch house is nothing fancy, 2 stories, 4 bedrooms, big kitchen. The hands have their own bunkhouse and the housekeeper's cabin sits between the two. And you've been managing alone for 5 years. My mother died when I was 15. Father and I managed well enough after that, but when he went, Ethan shrugged. You learned to make do. I'm sorry for your losses. It's the way of things out here. The land takes as much as it gives. He gestured toward the horizon where mountains rose purple in the distance. But it gives plenty if you're willing to work for it. They rode in companionable silence for a while, the wagon wheels creating a rhythmic complaint against the rutted road. Clara found herself relaxing despite the uncertainty of her situation. There was something solid about Ethan Cole, something that suggested he was exactly what he appeared to be, no more, no less. Can I ask you something? She said eventually. Why did Thomas really reject me? His telegram said I wasn't what he expected, but Ethan was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he said, Tom Whitaker has a very specific idea of what his wife should be. Beautiful, young, silent, and grateful. Someone who would make other men envious and never challenge him on anything. Your letters, from what I heard, suggested you had opinions, ideas, education. You heard about my letters. Tom read excerpts at the saloon. Thought they were hilarious, a woman writing about philosophy and literature like she understood them. His voice carried an edge of disgust. The other men laughed along, of course. Tom likes an audience. Humiliation burned through Clara. He read my private letters aloud for entertainment. Until last week. That's when he got your photograph. Clara's hand went unconsciously to her face. She knew she wasn't beautiful. Her features were too strong, her nose a bit too prominent, her mouth too wide. But she'd thought Thomas had fallen in love with her mind, her spirit, not her appearance. Let me guess, she said bitterly. I wasn't pretty enough for his grand plans. You weren't malleable enough, Ethan corrected. Pretty can be painted on. But a woman who thinks for herself, that can't be changed, and Tom knew it the moment he saw intelligence in your eyes, even in a photograph. You're being kind. I'm being honest. Tom Whitaker is a small man who needs to feel big. A woman like you would have made him feel smaller just by existing. Clara didn't know how to respond to that, so she watched the landscape roll by instead. The desert was coming alive as the day cooled with jackrabbits darting between bushes and quail calling from hidden roosts. It was alien and familiar at once, this wild place that demanded strength rather than beauty. There, Ethan said, pointing ahead. That's the Double C. The ranch sprawled across a valley between 2 ridges with a creek running through it that actually held water, a miracle in this dry land. The main house was indeed nothing fancy, but it was solid and welcoming with a wide porch wrapped around 2 sides and glass windows that caught the late afternoon light. The bunkhouse sat 100 yards away, smoke rising from its chimney, and between them stood a small cabin with its own little porch and what looked like a garden plot beside it. The previous housekeeper liked to grow vegetables, Ethan explained, following her gaze. The soil's good if you water it regular. We've got a well that never runs dry. As they approached, men emerged from various buildings, the barn, the bunkhouse, the corrals. They were a mix of ages and backgrounds. Clara could see from a grizzled older man who might have been 60 to a boy who couldn't be more than 17. They all watched with frank curiosity as Ethan helped her down from the wagon. "Boys, this is Miss Jennings," Ethan announced. "She's taking the housekeeper position. You'll treat her with respect and courtesy, or you'll be looking for work elsewhere." "Understood." A chorus of "yes, boss" and hat-tipping followed. "This here's Jake," Ethan said, indicating the older man. "He's my foreman. Been with the ranch longer than I have. Jake, would you get Miss Jennings' trunk to the cabin?" "Sure thing, boss." Jake hefted the trunk easily despite his age. "Welcome to the Double C, miss. You need anything, just holler." "Thank you, Mr. Just Jake is fine, miss. We're not formal folk out here." The others introduced themselves, Miguel and Carlos brothers from Sonora. Bill, a former soldier with kind eyes and a pronounced limp. Tommy, the 17-year-old who blushed furiously when she smiled at him, and Red, whose hair explained his nickname. "Come on," Ethan said. "I'll show you the cabin." The cabin was small but clean, just as he'd promised. One room served as both living area and kitchen, with a cast-iron stove, a table, and 2 chairs, and a rocking chair by the window. The bedroom was tiny but private, with a brass bed, a washstand, and a wardrobe. Everything was simple but well-maintained, and Clara could see feminine touches left by the previous occupant: curtains at the windows, a rag rug on the floor, even a few books on a shelf. "Mary left those," Ethan said, noticing her looking at the books. "She married a merchant from Tucson last year. Said you're welcome to anything she left behind." "It's perfect," Clara said, and meant it. After the humiliation at the depot, the stares in town, the revelation about her letters being mocked, this simple cabin felt like a sanctuary. The main house kitchen is where you'll do most of the cooking. Breakfast is at dawn, lunch at noon, dinner at sunset. The hands eat in the kitchen, we don't stand on ceremony. Sundays are half-days, morning chores, only then everyone's free. You'll have Sundays to yourself after breakfast. That's very generous. It's practical. Everyone needs rest or they burn out. He moved to the door, then turned back. "Take tonight to settle in. There's food in the main house kitchen if you're hungry later. Tomorrow morning I'll show you where everything is. Go over the accounts, introduce you to the routine." "Ethan," she called as he reached for the door handle, "why are you really doing this?" He paused, his back to her. "You ever have a moment where you know something's right, not think it, but know it deep in your bones?" "Once or twice." "This is one of those moments." He turned to face her. "I saw you on that platform standing there with your chin up despite everything, and I knew. You belong here, Clara Jennings. Don't ask me how I know, but I do." Before she could respond, he was gone, leaving her alone in the cabin with the weight of his words settling around her like a blanket. Clara sank into the rocking chair, suddenly exhausted. This morning, she'd awakened on a train headed toward what she thought was her future. Now, as the sun set over the Arizona mountains, she was a housekeeper on a cattle ranch employed by a man she'd known for all of 3 hours. She should have been terrified. Should have been planning her escape back to St. Louis, back to the narrow life she'd known. Instead, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years: possibility. As if this harsh, beautiful land and the straightforward man who worked it offered her something Thomas Whitaker never could have the chance to be exactly who she was. Through the window, she could see Ethan talking to his men by the corral, his tall figure silhouetted against the dying light. He laughed at something Jake said, the sound carrying across the distance, warm and genuine. This was his kingdom, she realized, not grand or fancy, but real and honest, and his. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find Tommy, the young hand holding a tray covered with a checkered cloth. "Boss said you might be hungry," he stammered, blushing again. "Cookie, that's Miguel, miss. He does the cooking right now. He made stew, and there's bread and butter and some coffee if you want it." "That's very kind. Thank you, Tommy." "Yes, miss. You're welcome, miss." He practically fled, and Clara found herself smiling for the first time since receiving Thomas's telegram. The stew was simple but good, rich with beef and vegetables. As she ate, Clara thought about the strange turn her life had taken. She'd come west to marry a merchant and become a proper society wife. Instead, she was eating stew in a cabin on a cattle ranch employed by a man who saw something in her worth saving. No, not saving. Ethan hadn't offered her rescue, he'd offered her work purpose a chance to prove herself. That was better than rescue. That was respect. As darkness fell over the double C, Clara unpacked her few belongings, hanging her dresses in the wardrobe, placing her books beside those Mary had left behind. Her photograph of her parents went on the bedside table, and her mother's silver brush on the washstand. Tomorrow she would begin her new life as a housekeeper. It wasn't what she'd planned, wasn't what anyone would have expected for her. But as she lay in the narrow bed listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch at night, cattle lowing horses, nickering coyotes calling in the distance, Clara felt more at home than she had in years. The morning came too soon, announced by a rooster who seemed determined to wake the entire territory. Clara dressed quickly in her simplest day dress, pinned her hair severely back, and made her way to the main house as the sky was just beginning to lighten in the east. The kitchen was enormous, dominated by a massive cast-iron stove that radiated warmth. Ethan was already there, coffee pot in hand, looking surprisingly alert for the early hour. "Morning," he said, pouring her a cup without asking. "Sleep well." "Better than I expected." She accepted the coffee gratefully, wrapping her hands around the warm mug. "Where do I start?" For the next hour, Ethan showed her around the kitchen, explaining where everything was kept, the rhythm of meals, the preferences of the men. The pantry was well stocked with dried goods, preserved meats, and canned vegetables. A root cellar held potatoes, onions, and other vegetables that could survive the heat. "Miguel's been doing the cooking, but he'd rather be working cattle," Ethan explained. "The men aren't picky, they just want it hot and plenty of it. Breakfast is usually biscuits, eggs, when we have them bacon or salt pork coffee. Lunch is lighter sandwiches if we're working close, something portable if we're out on the range. Dinner's the big meal." "I can handle that." Clara was already mentally planning menus, thinking about what she could do with the available ingredients. "The household accounts are here." He showed her a ledger surprisingly neat for a bachelor rancher. "I keep track of expenses, income from cattle sales, wages. You'll need to manage the household portion, food supplies, anything needed for the house itself." Clara studied the ledger, impressed by his organization. "You're very thorough." "Have to be. A ranch runs on narrow margins. One bad year can ruin you if you're not careful." By the time the men came in for breakfast, Clara had biscuits in the oven, bacon sizzling, and eggs ready to fry. The hands filed in with a mix of curiosity and hunger, taking their places at the long wooden table. She served them quickly, efficiently, noting who took sugar in their coffee, who preferred their eggs runny, who reached for hot sauce. "Miss Jennings," Jake said after his first bite of biscuit, "I don't mean to be forward, but would you marry me?" The table erupted in laughter, and Clara found herself laughing too. "I'm afraid I'm not in the market for a husband, Jake, but I'm glad you like the biscuits." "Can't blame a man for trying," Jake said with a wink. The easy camaraderie surprised her. These men, rough-weathered, probably uneducated by her standards, treated her with a natural respect that Thomas Whitaker, for all his pretensions to gentility, had never shown. After breakfast, as the men headed out to their various tasks, Ethan lingered. "You did well," he said simply. "It's just breakfast." "It's more than that. You made them comfortable. Not everyone can do that." He set his hat on his head, transforming from the man who'd shown her around the kitchen to the boss who ran a successful ranch. "I'll be out with the herd most of the day. If you need anything, Jake will be around the barn." Days fell into a rhythm faster than Clara had expected. Dawn breakfast, maintaining the house during the morning, preparing lunch, tackling the endless laundry and mending in the afternoon, then dinner as the sun set. It was hard work. Harder physically than being a governess had been, but there was a satisfaction in it she hadn't anticipated. The men were respectful, but friendly, each with their own quirks and stories. Jake had been a cavalry soldier before coming to work for Ethan's father. Miguel and Carlos sent most of their wages home to Mexico, supporting an extended family. Bill had lost his leg at Gettysburg, but could still outride most men with 2 good legs. Tommy was saving every penny to buy his own small spread someday. Red was running from something, though nobody asked what, and Ethan was a constant presence even when he wasn't there. She'd catch glimpses of him throughout the day, riding out with the dawn patrol, working horses, in the corral, mending fences with his shirt off in the afternoon heat, revealing a physique that made her look away flustered. In the evenings, he'd sometimes linger after dinner, helping her clean up despite her protests. "You must have something better to do," she said one evening, 2 weeks into her employment. "Probably." He agreed, continuing to dry dishes. but nothing I'd rather do. It was comments like that simple, direct, sincere that kept her off balance. Thomas had courted her with flowery words and elaborate compliments that she now recognized as hollow. Ethan said little, but every word carried weight. One evening, 3 weeks after her arrival, she found him on the porch after dinner reading by lamplight. It was such an unexpected sight that she stopped in the doorway. "I didn't know you read," she said, then immediately felt foolish. He looked up, that almost smile playing at his lips. "Disappointed to discover I'm literate." "No, I mean, relax, Clara, I'm teasing." He marked his place in the book, Twain, she noticed with surprise. "My mother insisted on education, said a man who couldn't read was only half alive." "She sounds wise." She was. He gestured to the empty chair beside him. "Join me unless you have other plans." Clara knew she should maintain professional distance. She was his employee, nothing more. But the evening was cool, the stars were beginning to emerge, and the thought of returning to her lonely cabin held no appeal. She sat maintaining a careful distance between them. "What else did your mother teach you?" "To judge people by their actions, not their words. To work hard, but remember what you're working for. To treat everyone with respect until they prove they don't deserve it." He paused, looking out at the darkening landscape. "To recognize something good when you find it." His eyes found hers in the lamplight, and Clara felt her breath catch. There was something in his gaze that had nothing to do with employer and employee, something that made her pulse quicken. "Ethan," she began, not sure what she was going to say. "Boss," Tommy's voice shattered the moment as he came running from the direction of the barn. "We got a problem. Looks like wolves got after the herd. We're missing at least 3 head. Ethan was on his feet immediately, the rancher replacing the man who'd been looking at her with such intensity. "Saddle the horses, we're riding out." As he strode away, Clara pressed her hand to her chest, feeling her heart race. This was dangerous, this attraction she felt. She was his housekeeper, nothing more. She couldn't afford to forget that, couldn't afford to risk her position for something as ephemeral as desire. But as she watched him mount his horse and ride off into the darkness, she knew it was already too late. Ethan Cole had offered her a job, but somewhere in the last 3 weeks, he'd claimed something much more precious, a piece of her carefully guarded heart. The wolves didn't return that night, but something had shifted in the air between Clara and Ethan, something as dangerous as any predator. She found herself watching for him during the day, her heart lifting when she heard his voice, her hands trembling slightly when he was near. It was foolishness, she told herself firmly, as she kneaded bread dough with perhaps more force than necessary. She'd come to Arizona for marriage and been rejected. The last thing she needed was to develop feelings for another man who would likely find her wanting. But Ethan wasn't Thomas Whitaker. Where Thomas had been all surface polish and hidden cruelty, Ethan was rough edges and unexpected depths. She discovered he kept a small library in his study books on everything from cattle breeding to Roman history. He played chess with Jake on rainy evenings, losing as often as he won. He knew every one of his cattle hands' birthdays and made sure there was always cake. "You're staring at him again," Miguel said one morning, making Clara jump. She hadn't heard him come into the kitchen. "I'm not staring at anyone," she said, turning back to the stove where she definitely hadn't been watching Ethan work a new horse in the corral. Miguel chuckled. "The boss, he's a good man. Lonely, though. Been alone too long." "That's none of my business." "Maybe not. But he smiles more since you came." Miguel took an apple from the bowl on the table. "Just something to think about." Clara didn't want to think about it. Thinking about it led to dangerous places, to hopes she couldn't afford to harbor. She was building a life here, a respectable position. She wouldn't risk it for romantic notions that would likely lead nowhere. But that evening, when Ethan appeared in the kitchen after dinner, she couldn't help the way her pulse quickened. "There's a dance in town Saturday night," he said without preamble. "Founders' Day celebration. The whole ranch usually goes." "That sounds nice for everyone." "You're included in everyone, Clara." She looked up from the dish she was washing. "I don't think that would be appropriate. I'm the housekeeper." "You're also a member of this ranch." His jaw tightened slightly. "Unless you're worried about what people will say." "Aren't you?" "No?" The word was flat final. "I stopped caring what the town gossips think a long time ago. But if you're uncomfortable..." "It's not that." Clara dried her hands on her apron, searching for the right words. Ethan, you've been very kind to me. You gave me employment when I desperately needed it. I don't want to compromise your reputation or mine by appearing to be something we're not. And what would we be appearing to be? The question hung between them, loaded with possibilities. Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks. You know what people would think? An unmarried woman living on your ranch accompanying you to social events. They'd think I'm courting you. The boldness of it took her breath away. Yes. Would that be so terrible? Clara's hands stilled on the towel. What are you saying? Ethan moved closer, not touching her, but near enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. I'm saying that I'd like to escort you to the dance, Clara. Not as your employer, but as a man who enjoys your company. If you're willing. She should say no. Every practical bone in her body screamed that this was a mistake. But looking up into those sage honey eyes, seeing the genuine hope there mixed with uncertainty, she found herself nodding. I'd like that, she whispered. His smile transformed his face, making him look younger, lighter. Saturday, then. We'll leave at 6. After he left, Clara sank into a chair, pressing her hands to her burning cheeks. What had she just agreed to? She had exactly 3 dresses to her name, none of them suitable for a dance. She hadn't danced in years. And everyone would be watching, judging, remembering that she was Thomas Whitaker's rejected bride. You need a dress, Jake announced the next morning at breakfast, proving that ranch gossip traveled faster than wildfire. I have dresses, Clara said, refilling his coffee cup. Not dancing dresses. He looked around the table at the other hands. We're taking up a collection. Absolutely not. Clara's voice was firm. I won't take charity. It's not charity, Red said. It's appreciation. You've been feeding us good for a month now. Least we can do is make sure you have something pretty to wear when the boss finally worked up the courage to ask you stepping out. He asked me to a dance, not to marry him, Clara protested, but the men were already pulling money from their pockets. Same difference, Jake said with a grin. Boss hasn't looked at a woman twice since Mary Ellen broke his heart 5 years back. This was news to Clara. Mary Ellen. Banker's daughter from Tucson, Tommy supplied. Let him on for a year, then married some rich fellow from back east. Said ranch life wasn't refined enough for her. Clara's heart ached for Ethan, understanding now why he'd been so kind to her at the depot. He knew what rejection felt like. Here, Jake presented her with a small pile of bills. Enough for fabric and notions. Martha's got a good selection at the general store, and she's handy with a needle if you need help. Clara wanted to refuse, but the hope in their weathered faces stopped her. These men had become like family in the past month, and families helped each other. Thank you, she said softly. All of you. That afternoon, she rode into town on the wagon, a list of ranch supplies providing her official reason for the trip. Martha's face lit up when Clara explained what she needed. About time that man came to his senses, Martha said, pulling out bolt after bolt of fabric. This blue would match your eyes, or this green very fashionable. Clara fingered a bolt of deep burgundy silk, the color of wine in candlelight. It was impractical, expensive, completely unsuitable for a housekeeper. This one, she said. Martha smiled knowingly. Perfect choice. You'll need help with the fitting. Come upstairs. For the next 3 hours, Martha and her daughter worked magic with scissors and thread, creating a dress that was elegant but not ostentatious, flattering but not scandalous. The burgundy silk made Clara's pale skin glow and brought out the auburn highlights in her dark hair. You'll be the prettiest girl at the dance, Martha's daughter Lucy said with a sigh. Mr. Cole won't be able to take his eyes off you. That's enough of that talk, Martha said, but she was smiling. Though she's not wrong, that man's been waiting for someone like you, even if he didn't know it. Clara made her other purchases, the supplies the ranch needed, and was loading the wagon when she heard a familiar, unwelcome voice. Well, well, the rejected bride doing the shopping like a common servant. Thomas Whitaker stood on the boardwalk, his pompous face twisted in a sneer. He looked exactly as she'd imagined from his letters overdressed for the frontier soft, where Ethan was hard weak, where Ethan was strong. Mr. Whitaker, Clara kept her voice level, continuing to load the wagon. I hear Cole took you in. Playing house with him now. The insinuation in his tone made her skin crawl. I'm employed as his housekeeper. It's honest work. Is that what they're calling it now? Thomas stepped closer, and Clara could smell his pomade, cloying and sweet. You could have had everything with me, you know. A fine house, social position, respect. I could have had a cage, Clara said quietly. A pretty one, perhaps, but still a cage. His face reddened. You always did think too highly of yourself. Too educated, too opinionated, too plain to have such airs. Then you should be grateful I saved you from such an unsuitable match. Clara climbed onto the wagon seat. Good day, Mr. Whitaker. He'll tire of you, too, Thomas called after her. When the novelty wears off, men like Cole might enjoy playing with educated women, but they don't marry them. Clara drove away without responding, but his words echoed in her mind. Was that what she was to Ethan? A novelty. An interesting diversion from the usual ranch routine. When she arrived back at the Double C, Ethan was waiting on the porch, clearly watching for her return. The concern in his eyes when he saw her face made her heart constrict. What happened? He was beside the wagon in 3 strides, helping her down. Nothing. I saw Thomas in town, that's all. Ethan's jaw tightened. What did he say? Nothing worth repeating. She managed a smile. Martha helped me with a dress for Saturday. The men took up a collection. I know, Jake asked my permission. He was still studying her face, seeing more than she wanted to reveal. Clara, if Whitaker said something to upset you. He said I was too educated and plain to have heirs. Nothing I haven't heard before. Ethan's hands came up to frame her face, the touch so unexpected that Clara froze. You are educated, he said quietly. It's one of the things I admire most about you. You can discuss books and ideas, you can manage accounts, you can think for yourself. As for plain, his thumb traced her cheekbone. Thomas Whitaker wouldn't know beauty if it bit him. You have the kind of face that gets more interesting the longer you look at it, the kind that stays beautiful when the pretty girls have faded. Clara couldn't breathe. His hands were so gentle, his eyes so sincere. Ethan, Saturday night you'll be with me. Let him see what he threw away. He released her, stepping back. Jake and the boys will get the supplies. You should rest. Clara watched him walk away, her skin still tingling from his touch. Thomas's words seemed smaller now, less significant. What did it matter, what he thought, when Ethan looked at her like she was something precious? Saturday arrived with unseasonable clouds that promised rain but held off, creating a dramatic sky as the ranch prepared for the dance. Clara had spent extra time with her hair, pinning it up in a style that was fashionable, but not too elaborate, leaving a few tendrils to curl around her face. The burgundy dress fit perfectly, the silk whispering against her skin as she moved. She heard boots on her cabin porch and opened the door to find Ethan standing there in a black suit she hadn't known he owned, his usually unruly hair slicked back a string tie at his throat. He looked devastatingly handsome, and Clara's mouth went dry. You're beautiful, he said simply, his eyes traveling over her with an appreciation that made her blush. You clean up well yourself, she managed. He offered his arm. Shall we? The other hands were already loading into a wagon, all dressed in their best clothes. They whistled and cheered when they saw Clara, making her laugh. You look like a queen, Tommy said, then turned red as a beet. Thank you, Tommy. You all look very handsome. The ride to town was filled with the men's good-natured ribbing and jokes easing Clara's nerves about the evening ahead. But as they approached the town hall, lit up with lanterns and already full of people, her anxiety returned. She was about to walk into a room full of people who knew she'd been rejected, who'd heard about Thomas's mockery of her letters. Hey, Ethan said softly, his hand covering hers where it rested on his arm. You belong here as much as anyone, more than most. The town hall had been transformed with ribbons and bunting tables laden with food, along one wall a space cleared for dancing. The local musicians were already playing and couples were moving across the floor in a lively reel. Heads turned as they entered, whispers rippling through the crowd. That's her Whitaker's rejected bride, working as Cole's housekeeper now. Look at that dress. Chin up, Ethan murmured. Let them look. He led her directly onto the dance floor, pulling her into position just as a waltz began. Clara's hand trembled slightly as she placed it on his shoulder, but his steady presence calmed her. "I should warn you, I haven't danced in years," she said. "Just follow my lead." He was a surprisingly good dancer, moving with the same easy grace he showed on horseback. Clara found herself relaxing, letting him guide her through the familiar steps. The room blurred around them until there was only Ethan, his hand warm at her waist, his eyes never leaving her face. "People are staring," she said. "Let them. Your reputation is my concern, not yours." He spun her, making her burgundy skirts flare. "Besides, I like them seeing you with me. Makes it clear you're under my protection." "I don't need protection." "No," he agreed. "But you have it anyway." The dance ended, but before Clara could leave the floor, Jake appeared, bowing formally. "Miss Clara, might I have this dance?" For the next hour, she was passed from partner to partner, all the double C hands taking their turns, even shy Tommy managing a creditable polka. She was laughing, breathless, and happier than she'd been in months when she noticed Thomas Whitaker standing near the punch bowl, his face purple with indignation. "Excuse me," she told Red, who was her current partner. "I need some air." She slipped out onto the side porch, grateful for the cool evening breeze. The clouds had cleared, revealing a stunning array of stars. She was studying them when footsteps made her turn. Thomas stood in the doorway, his expression ugly. "Enjoying yourself, playing the belle of the ball?" "I'm enjoying a pleasant evening with friends," Clara said evenly. "Friends." He laughed, the sound harsh. "Is that what you call it? You've certainly landed on your feet, haven't you? Rejected by me, but immediately scooped up by Cole." "You didn't reject me, Thomas. You rejected an idea of me that existed only in your head. The real me was never what you wanted. The real you is exactly what I thought, a bluestocking with ideas above her station." "Perhaps. But at least I know who I am. Can you say the same?" His face contorted. "You think you've won something being Cole's whore?" The slap of a hand against flesh cracked through the night, but it wasn't Clara who had struck. Ethan stood behind Thomas, having grabbed his shoulder and spun him around before his fist connected with Thomas's jaw. The merchant went down hard, landing in an undignified heap. "You ever speak about her like that again, or to her at all, and I'll do worse than knock you down," Ethan said, his voice deadly quiet. "She's a lady, which is more than anyone who knows you can say about you. Now get up and get out before I forget my manners entirely." Thomas scrambled to his feet, holding his bleeding nose. "You'll regret this, Cole. Both of you will." "The only thing I regret is not doing it sooner." Ethan stepped aside, letting Thomas flee. Clara realized she was shaking. "You shouldn't have hit him." "Yes, I should have." Ethan took off his jacket, draping it around her shoulders. "He insulted you. He's been insulting you since you arrived. It stops now. People will talk. They're already talking." He turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "Clara, I need to say something, and I need you to hear me out." Her heart began racing. "Ethan, I knew the moment I saw you on that platform that you were special. Not because you were beautiful, though you are. Not because you needed help, though you did. But because even at your lowest moment, you had dignity, strength, fire." His hand slid down to take hers. "This past month, watching you make my house a home, seeing you win over the men, having conversations with you in the evening, it's been the best month I've had in 5 years. Ethan, I'm your employee." "No." "Well, yes, technically, but that's not what you are to me." He squeezed her hands. "I'm not Thomas Whitaker. I'm not looking for an ornament or a silent partner. I want a woman who can match me, challenge me, stand beside me as an equal. I want you, Clara." The words hung between them, monumental and terrifying and wonderful. "I don't know what to say," Clara whispered. "Say you'll give me a chance. Say you'll let me court you properly. Say you feel something of what I feel." Clara looked up into his face, seeing the vulnerability there, the hope. This man who had saved her without making her feel saved, who had given her purpose and dignity and a place to belong, he was offering his heart with the same straightforward honesty he brought to everything. "I feel it," she admitted. "I've been trying not to, but I do." His smile was radiant. Then let me court you. Let the whole town see it. Let them know that Clara Jennings has choices and she chooses me. What about my position? I can't be your housekeeper if We'll figure it out. Jake's wife has been wanting to come help at the ranch. We could bring her on, give you different responsibilities, or he paused, looking suddenly uncertain. Or we could make it a moot point by getting married. Clara's breath caught. That's not a proposal, is it? No. When I propose, you'll know it. This is just me saying that my intentions are honorable. I'm not playing games, Clara. I'm 32 years old, I know what I want, and what I want is you. As my wife eventually, if you'll have me. Before Clara could respond, music drifted out from the hall, a slow, romantic waltz. Ethan held out his hand. Dance with me. Here, under the stars. Let me show you how it could be. Clara took his hand, letting him pull her into his arms. They danced there on the porch with the stars as their chandelier and the distant mountains as their walls. His hand at her waist pulled her closer than was proper, but Clara didn't care. She rested her head against his chest, feeling his heart beat strong and steady. Yes, she said softly. Yes. Yes, you can court me. Yes, I choose you. Yes to all of it. She felt his lips press against the top of her head, gentle and reverent. They swayed together as the music ended, and another song began, neither wanting to break the spell. We should go back in, Clara said eventually. People will wonder. Let them wonder. But he released her, keeping only her hand in his. Though you're right. If we're doing this, we're doing it in the open. No hiding, no shame. They walked back into the hall together, and the immediate hush told Clara everyone had heard about the altercation with Thomas. But then Martha started clapping, and Jake joined her, and soon the whole room was applauding. Thomas was nowhere to be seen. About damn time, someone called out, making everyone laugh. Ethan led Clara back onto the dance floor, and this time she didn't notice the stares or whispers. She was too focused on the man holding her, the man who had seen her at her worst and decided she was worth fighting for. As the evening wound down and they prepared to leave, Clara caught sight of herself in the mirror behind the punch table. She barely recognized the woman looking back, confident, radiant, desired. This wasn't the governess from St. Louis or the rejected bride from the train platform. This was someone new, someone who had been forged in the crucible of humiliation and emerged stronger. Ready to go home? Ethan asked, appearing beside her. Home. Yes, the double C had become home without her noticing, and Ethan was becoming something even more important. Yes, she said, taking his offered arm. Let's go home. The ride back to the ranch was quieter than the journey there, the men tired from dancing and perhaps sensing the change between their boss and the housekeeper. Clara sat beside Ethan on the wagon seat, not quite touching but aware of every inch between them. When they reached the ranch, the hands dispersed quickly to the bunkhouse, leaving Clara and Ethan alone in the moonlight. Thank you, she said, for tonight, for defending me, for everything. You don't need to thank me for treating you the way you deserve to be treated. He cupped her face gently. May I kiss you, Clara? Her heart hammered against her ribs. Yes. The kiss was gentle, almost chaste, but it sent fire through her veins. His lips were warm and sure, and when he pulled back, Clara swayed toward him, wanting more. Good night, Clara, he said, his voice rough. Sweet dreams. She watched him walk to the main house, his figure tall and strong in the moonlight. Everything had changed tonight. She'd walked into that dance as a housekeeper and left as a woman being courted. More than that, she'd left as a woman who had chosen her own path, her own man, her own future. Inside her cabin, Clara unpinned her hair and changed into her nightgown, hanging the burgundy dress carefully in the wardrobe. Tomorrow, she would wake up and cook breakfast and maintain the house. But it would all be different now. Tomorrow, she would be Clara Jennings, beloved of Ethan Cole. The thought filled her with a joy so intense it almost frightened her. She'd come west expecting one life and found another entirely. Thomas's rejection, which had seemed like the end of everything, had actually been the beginning. If he hadn't sent that telegram, she would be married to him now, trapped in a loveless marriage, with a man who saw her as property. Instead, she was free to choose, and she chose Ethan. A knock at her door made her grab her shawl, wrapping it around her shoulders before answering. Jake stood there, hat in hand. Sorry to disturb you, miss, but thought you should know Thomas Whitaker was in the saloon after the dance drunk as a skunk and making threats. Nothing specific, but he's not taking tonight well. Do you think he'll cause trouble? Maybe. The boss can handle himself, but you should be careful. Men like Whitaker don't like being shown up, especially by women who refuse them. Clara nodded. Thank you for the warning, Jake. We look after our own here at the Double C. You're one of us now, miss. More than ever after tonight. After Jake left, Clara sat in her rocking chair, unable to sleep. The joy of the evening was tempered now with unease. Thomas Whitaker was a petty man with wounded pride, a dangerous combination. But as she thought about it, she realized she wasn't afraid. She had Ethan. She had the ranch hands, she had a place where she belonged. Whatever Thomas tried, she wouldn't face it alone. Dawn came too soon, but Clara rose and began her daily routine. The normalcy of it, making biscuits, brewing coffee, frying bacon, soothed her nerves. The men filed in as usual, though their smiles were warmer, their greetings more familiar. Morning, Miss Clara, Jake said with a wink. Sleep well. Very well, thank you. Ethan was the last to arrive, and when their eyes met, Clara felt the same flutter she'd experienced the night before. He took his usual seat, but when she served his coffee, his fingers brushed hers deliberately. We need to talk, he said quietly. After breakfast. Clara nodded, wondering if he was having second thoughts. The meal seemed to last forever, but finally the men headed out to their work, leaving them alone. I've been thinking, Ethan began, and Clara's heart sank. Here it came, the retraction, the regret. About your position here. It's not appropriate for me to court an employee. I understand. I can look for other... No. He caught her hand. That's not what I mean. I want to make you my partner, Clara, in everything. The household management, the ranch accounts, decisions about the property. You'd still live in the cabin for propriety's sake, but you'd be more than a housekeeper. You'd be preparing to be the lady of the ranch. Clara stared at him. That's a lot of responsibility. You're already doing half of it, and you're smart enough to handle all of it. He squeezed her hand. I'm not Thomas Whitaker, Clara. I don't want a wife who just pours tea and looks pretty. I want a partner who can help me build something lasting. What about the men? Won't they resent taking orders from a woman? Did you see them last night? They already respect you. Besides, they take orders from you now about meals and household things. This would just be expanding that. It was unconventional, probably scandalous by society's standards, but then nothing about her situation had been conventional from the start. All right, she said. Partners. His smile made her heart skip. Partners. In business now and eventually. He lifted her hand to his lips. Eventually in everything else. The new arrangement worked better than Clara had expected. She took over the ranch accounts, entirely finding several places where expenses could be trimmed. She negotiated with suppliers in town her education and manner, commanding respect even from those who'd initially dismissed her. The ranch hands adapted quickly, coming to her with problems they might have once taken only to Ethan. And Ethan courted her with a steady determination that took her breath away. He brought her wildflowers from the range, left books he thought she'd enjoy, on her porch walked with her in the evenings when work was done. He kissed her too, each kiss deeper and more passionate than the last, until Clara thought she might burn up from wanting more. 3 weeks had passed since the Founders' Day dance, and the October air carried the first hint of winter's approach. Clara stood in the ranch office reviewing ledgers by lamplight while rain drummed against the windows. The numbers told a story of gradual prosperity, each column of figures representing Ethan's hard work and smart decisions. She'd found ways to reduce costs without sacrificing quality renegotiated contracts with suppliers, and even secured a better price for their winter hay delivery. You're going to strain your eyes, Ethan said from the doorway, making her look up. He was soaked from the rain, his shirt clinging to his broad shoulders in a way that made her pulse quicken. The ledgers won't balance themselves, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Besides, someone needs to make sure you're not spending too much on unnecessary expenses. Unnecessary. He moved into the room, bringing the scent of rain and leather with him. Like what? Like that new dress from Tucson that arrived yesterday. That's not an unnecessary expense. That's an investment in my future wife's happiness. He came around the desk, his hands settling on her shoulders. You've been working too hard. The ranch doesn't run itself. No, but it doesn't need to run you into the ground either. His thumbs rubbed gentle circles against her tense muscles. Come on, let me walk you to your cabin. Clara wanted to protest, but the warmth of his hands and the concern in his voice weakened her resolve. She closed the ledger and stood, letting him help her with her shawl. The rain had softened to a drizzle, and they walked slowly across the yard, neither wanting to rush. Jake tells me you faced down Henderson from the feed store today, Ethan said, his voice carrying a note of pride. He was trying to overcharge us. I simply showed him the receipts from last year and suggested we might take our business to Phoenix if he couldn't match those prices. And he matched them, then knocked off another 5% for future orders. Clara couldn't hide her satisfaction. I also arranged for credit terms that will help during the lean months. Ethan stopped walking, turning her to face him. In the dim light from the ranch house, his eyes were intense. You're remarkable, you know that. I'm just doing what needs to be done. No, you're doing so much more than that. His hand came up to cup her cheek. You're making this place better, making me better. Before Clara could respond, he was kissing her rain droplets from his hair falling onto her face like tiny cold kisses. She melted against him, her arms going around his neck, not caring that they were standing in the middle of the yard where anyone could see. Marry me, he said against her lips. Clara pulled back, breathless. What? I know it's only been a month since we started courting, but I knew from the first day. Marry me, Clara. Not next year, not next month, soon. Ethan, people will talk. They'll say we're rushing. Let them talk. I've wasted enough time being cautious, being proper. 5 years since Mary Ellen, 5 years of playing it safe. His hands framed her face. I don't want to waste another day not being married to you. Clara's heart was racing so fast she felt dizzy. This is crazy. Maybe, but it's also right. Tell me you don't feel it too. She did feel it, that sense of rightness of pieces falling into place. But there was something else, a nagging worry that had been growing stronger each day. Thomas has been making threats, she said. Jake told me he's been drinking heavily, talking about revenge. If we marry now, it might provoke him into doing something foolish. Thomas Whitaker doesn't dictate our lives, Ethan said firmly. If anything, marrying you would offer you more protection. As my wife, you'd have legal standing security. I don't want to marry for protection. I had enough of that thinking with Thomas. Then marry me for love. His voice dropped, becoming rough with emotion. Because I love you, Clara. I love your strength, your intelligence, your determination. I love the way you hum when you're cooking and the way you bite your lip when you're concentrating on the ledgers. I love that you treat the ranch hands with respect and that you stand up to suppliers twice your size. I love everything about you. Clara's eyes filled with tears. No one had ever spoken to her like this with such raw honesty and devotion. I love you too, she whispered. But no buts. Yes or no, Clara? Will you marry me? The smart thing would be to wait to let their courtship follow a proper timeline. But standing there in the rain with this man who had shown her more genuine care in 2 months than she'd received in years, Clara realized she was tired of doing the smart thing. Yes, she said. Yes, I'll marry you. His whoop of joy echoed across the ranch, bringing faces to the bunkhouse windows. He swept her up, spinning her around until she was laughing and dizzy. When? He asked, setting her down but keeping his arms around her. 2 weeks. That would give us time to arrange things. Invite people. 2 weeks it is. He kissed her again, quick and fierce. 2 weeks and you'll be Mrs. Clara Cole. The name sent a thrill through her. Clara Cole. It sounded right. Sounded like who she was meant to be. The next morning, news of their engagement had somehow spread to every corner of the ranch before breakfast. The hands offered congratulations with their requests for more coffee, and Jake presented Clara with a small wooden box. My wife's wedding ring, he said gruffly. She passed 10 years ago, but she'd want someone to have use of it. Consider it a loan for the ceremony if you need it. Clara hugged the older man, making him turn red and mutter about having work to do. We should go to town today, Ethan said after the men had headed out. Tell Martha arrange things with the preacher, let you pick out fabric for a wedding dress. I don't need anything fancy. You need whatever makes you happy. This is your wedding, Clara. Our wedding. I want it to be perfect for you. They rode to town together, Clara wearing her best day dress and trying to calm the butterflies in her stomach. The news would spread like wildfire once Martha knew, and then there would be no taking it back. Not that she wanted to take it back, but the speed of it all still took her breath away. Martha's reaction was everything Clara expected and more. The older woman actually squealed, then immediately began planning, pulling out fabric samples and discussing flowers and food. 2 weeks isn't much time, Martha said, but we'll manage. Oh, this is wonderful. After everything you've been through, you deserve happiness. They were examining white silk when the shop door chimed. Clara looked up to see Thomas Whitaker entering, his face already flushed with drink despite the early hour. His clothes were disheveled, his appearance a far cry from the pompous merchant of 2 months ago. Well, well, he slurred, swaying slightly. The happy couple. Heard the news already. Didn't take you long to spread your legs for him, did it? Ethan moved so fast Clara barely saw it. One moment Thomas was standing, the next, he was pressed against the wall with Ethan's forearm across his throat. I warned you about speaking to her, Ethan growled. This is your last chance. Leave now. Leave town if you have any sense and don't come near my fiancée again. Your fiancée? Thomas spat. She was supposed to be mine. I paid for her passage. You rejected her. Best decision you ever made, though you're too stupid to know it. Ethan released him with a shove. Get out. Thomas stumbled toward the door, then turned back. This isn't over, Cole. You think you've won, but I'll make you both sorry. You'll see. After he left, Martha locked the door and pulled down the shade. Don't you pay that man any mind, she said firmly. He's all talk and whiskey these days. Lost half his business since word got out how he treated you, Clara. People don't take kindly to that sort of behavior. But Clara saw the worry in Ethan's eyes and knew he was thinking the same thing she was. Desperate men did desperate things, and Thomas Whitaker was clearly desperate. Maybe we should postpone, Clara began. No. Ethan's voice was firm. We're not letting him dictate our lives. We're getting married in 2 weeks as planned, but I'm posting extra guards at the ranch and you're not going anywhere alone until after the wedding. Clara wanted to protest the restriction, but the memory of Thomas's wild eyes stopped her. Pride was one thing, foolishness was another. The next days passed in a whirlwind of preparation. Martha and her daughter came to the ranch to work on Clara's dress, a simple but elegant creation in ivory silk that made her look, according to young Tommy, like an angel. The ranch hands threw themselves into sprucing up the place, painting the main house's shutters, building an arbor for the ceremony, even constructing rough benches for the guests. You don't have to do all this, Clara protested to Jake. Yes, we do, he replied. You took a bunch of rough cowboys and made us feel like we had a real home again. Least we can do is make your wedding day special. Ethan was tender but careful with her during this time, kissing her goodnight at her cabin door but going no further. The restraint was killing them both. Clara could see it in the tension of his jaw, feel it in the trembling of his hands when he touched her. Soon, he would murmur against her hair, soon you'll be my wife, and I won't have to leave you at this door. 3 days before the wedding, Clara was in the kitchen making bread when she heard riders approaching fast. She looked out to see Jake and Miguel supporting a bloody figure between them. Red, his face pale and blood soaking through his shirt. What happened? Clara grabbed clean cloths and the medical supplies they kept for emergencies. Ambush, Jake said grimly. On the road from town. 3 men masked. They were after the payroll Red was bringing back. Did they get it? No, ma'am. Red fought them off, but he took a bullet in the shoulder. Clara worked quickly, her governess training including basic medical knowledge. The wound was clean, the bullet having passed through without hitting anything vital. As she worked, Red mumbled through his pain. One of them, his voice sounded like Whitaker. Jake and Clara exchanged glances. You sure? Jake asked. Pretty sure. Had that fancy way of talking even through the mask. Ethan arrived then, having heard the commotion from the far pasture. His face went dark as Jake explained what had happened. That's it, he said. I'm going to town to have a word with the sheriff. The sheriff won't do anything without proof, Clara said, still working on Red's shoulder. And Thomas will have alibis. Then I'll handle it myself. No. Clara stood bloodied cloths in her hands. You won't. You won't become a killer because of Thomas Whitaker. We're getting married in 3 days, and I won't have you in jail or worse. Clara. No, Ethan. Promise me. Promise you won't do anything foolish. He stared at her for a long moment, jaw clenched. Fine. But we're doubling the guards, and you don't leave the ranch house until the wedding. The next 2 days were tense, everyone watching for trouble. But nothing happened, and Clara began to hope Thomas had gotten whatever revenge he'd sought out of his system with the failed robbery. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and perfect, with the October sun warming the desert without scorching it. Clara stood in her cabin, letting Martha and Lucy help her into her wedding dress. Her hair was pinned up with small white flowers from Martha's garden, and Jake's wife's ring, a simple gold band with a small diamond, served as her engagement ring. You're beautiful, Lucy sighed. Mr. Cole is going to faint when he sees you. Let's hope not. Clara laughed, though her own nerves were singing. In an hour she would be married. Mrs. Ethan Cole. The thought still seemed surreal. A knock at the door interrupted them. Martha opened it to find Jake, his face serious. Miss Clara, we might have a problem. Thomas Whitaker's in town drunk and telling everyone the wedding should be stopped. He's making wild accusations. Clara's heart sank. What kind of accusations? Says you're already married, that you've got a husband back in St. Louis you abandoned. That's absurd. We know that, but he's got some official-looking papers. The sheriff's heading out here to investigate. Clara sank into a chair, her wedding dress pooling around her. Of course Thomas would try something like this. He couldn't stand to see her happy. I've never been married, she said firmly. Those papers must be forged. I'm sure they are, but the sheriff has to investigate. The preacher won't perform the ceremony if there's any question about it. Martha's face was thunderous. That horrible little man on your wedding day. What do we do? Lucy asked. Clara stood squaring her shoulders. We face it head on. Jake asked Ethan to meet me at the main house. Martha helped me out of this dress. I need to look respectable, but not like a bride when I meet the sheriff. 20 minutes later, Clara sat in the ranch office, Ethan beside her facing Sheriff Watson and Thomas Whitaker. Thomas looked triumphant despite his disheveled appearance, waving a set of papers. Marriage certificate from St. Louis, he announced. Clara Jennings married to one Robert Mills, dated 2 years ago. Clara took the papers, studying them. They were convincing forgeries, but forgeries nonetheless. Sheriff, I can prove these are fake. Telegraph St. Louis, the courthouse there. They'll have no record of this marriage because it never happened. That'll take days, Thomas said quickly. Meanwhile, this wedding can't proceed. Why are you doing this? Clara asked him directly. What possible benefit do you get from this cruelty? You humiliated me, made me a laughingstock. You think you're so much better than everyone else with your education and your heirs. His face was red spittle flying as he spoke. If I can't have you, neither can he. Mr. Whitaker, the sheriff said slowly, these are serious allegations. If these papers are fake, you're looking at fraud charges. They're not fake. Then you won't mind if I telegraph St. Louis right now to confirm. The sheriff stood. There's a telegraph office in town. We can have an answer within hours. Thomas's face paled. That's not necessary. I think it is. The sheriff took the papers. Mr. Cole, Miss Jennings, I apologize for the interruption. Give me 3 hours to sort this out. Those were the longest 3 hours of Clara's life. The wedding guests had begun arriving, and rumors flew about the delay. Clara sat in her cabin, still in her ordinary dress, while Martha and Lucy tried to distract her with small talk. Finally, Jake appeared at the door, grinning broadly. Sheriff's back. Papers were fake, just like you said. Thomas is under arrest for fraud and attempted robbery. Red identified his voice officially. He's looking at serious jail time. Relief flooded through Clara so intensely she had to sit down. So, the wedding can proceed immediately. Preacher's ready guests are waiting, and the groom is about to wear a hole in the porch from pacing. Clara laughed, tension releasing in a rush. Then I suppose I should put my dress back on. 30 minutes later, Clara stood at the entrance to the main house's parlor, which had been decorated with autumn flowers and ribbons. Through the doorway, she could see Ethan standing with the preacher, his face tight with nerves. The room was packed with neighbors, ranch hands, and townspeople who'd come to wish them well. Miguel's guitar began the wedding march, and Clara stepped forward. The moment Ethan saw her, his whole face transformed tension melting into wonder. She walked toward him, their eyes locked, the rest of the world fading away. "You came," he whispered when she reached him. "Did you doubt it?" "After this morning, I wasn't sure of anything except that I love you." The preacher cleared his throat. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to witness the union of Ethan Cole and Clara Jennings. I understand there's been some excitement this morning, but I'm assured all impediments have been cleared. They have. Sheriff Watson called from the back, and the individual responsible is enjoying the hospitality of my jail." Laughter rippled through the crowd, easing the last of the tension. The ceremony was simple but perfect. Ethan's hands were steady as he slipped the ring onto Clara's finger, his voice strong as he spoke his vows. Clara's own voice didn't waver as she promised to love, honor, and cherish him. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Ethan kissed her with a thoroughness that made the crowd cheer and Clara blush. "Ladies and gentlemen," the preacher announced, "I present Mr. and Mrs. Ethan Cole." The celebration that followed was unlike anything the Double C had seen. Tables groaned under the weight of food. Musicians played late into the evening, and dancing went on until the stars were bright overhead. Clara danced with Ethan, with Jake, with all the ranch hands, even with Sheriff Watson, who apologized again for the morning's drama. "You handled it with real grace, ma'am," he said. "Not many brides would have been so calm." "I've learned that the best things in life are worth fighting for," Clara replied, glancing at Ethan, who was laughing with some neighbors. As the evening wound down and guests began departing, Ethan appeared at Clara's elbow. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Cole?" The name sent a thrill through her. "We are home. I mean to our room. Jake's moving your things from the cabin tomorrow, but tonight," his eyes were dark with promise, "tonight, you're mine." Heat flooded through Clara. "I've been yours since that first day at the depot." He led her upstairs to the master bedroom, which the hands had decorated with flowers and candles. Clara had been in this room before, checking linens and cleaning, but it felt different now. This was her room, her house, her life. "Are you nervous?" Ethan asked, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "No," Clara said honestly. "Nothing about this feels wrong." He turned her to face him, his fingers working the buttons of her dress with practiced ease. "I've wanted you for so long," he murmured against her neck. "Wanted to make you mine in every way." Clara's response was lost in a gasp as his lips found that sensitive spot below her ear. Her wedding dress pooled at her feet, and then his hands were everywhere, worshiping her with a reverence that brought tears to her eyes. Later, much later, they lay entwined in the big bed, moonlight streaming through the windows. Clara traced lazy patterns on Ethan's chest, marveling at the turn her life had taken. "What are you thinking?" he asked, his voice drowsy with satisfaction. "That Thomas Whitaker did me the greatest favor of my life by rejecting me." Ethan's arms tightened around her. "Remind me to thank him when he gets out of jail." "How long do you think he'll get?" "For fraud and attempted robbery." "Few years at least, long enough for him to hopefully learn his lesson." "And if he doesn't?" "Then we'll deal with it, together." He tilted her chin up to look at him. "You're not alone anymore, Clara. You'll never be alone again." The next morning, Clara woke to sunlight and the sound of masculine laughter from downstairs. She dressed quickly and found the ranch hands gathered in the kitchen, attempting to make breakfast. "Mrs. Cole," Tommy exclaimed, turning red. "We didn't want to wake you, but we don't know where anything is anymore since you reorganized." Clara laughed, tying on her apron. "Out of my kitchen, all of you. I'll have breakfast ready in 30 minutes. "You don't have to cook on the morning after your wedding," Jake protested. "Where else would I want to be?" Clara asked, already pulling out ingredients. "This is my home. You're my family. Besides, from the looks of things, if I don't cook, no one eats." Ethan appeared in the doorway, his hair still mussed from sleep. "My wife's first morning as Mrs. Cole, and she's already working." "Your wife is doing what she loves," Clara corrected, standing on tiptoe to kiss him as the men hooted and hollered. As she cooked breakfast for her husband and their extended family of cowboys, Clara thought about the journey that had brought her here. From rejected bride to respected wife, from humiliation to happiness, from solitude to belonging. The path had been unexpected, sometimes painful, but it had led her exactly where she needed to be. "Hey, Mrs. Cole," Red called from his seat, his shoulder still bandaged, but his color good. "Jake says you're keeping the household accounts now. Does that mean you control Ethan's money?" "It means she controls everything," Ethan said, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "And I wouldn't have it any other way." Clara leaned back against him, feeling the solid warmth of his chest, the steady beat of his heart. This was what she'd traveled west to find, though she hadn't known it at the time. Not just a husband, but a partner. Not just a house, but a home. Not just acceptance, but love. Through the kitchen window, she could see the mountains in the distance, purple against the morning sky. The same mountains she'd seen that first day riding to the ranch with a stranger who would become everything to her. So much had changed, yet the mountains remained steady and enduring like the love she'd found in this unlikely place. "Breakfast is ready," she announced, setting platters on the table. As the men dug in with enthusiasm, Ethan whispered in her ear, "Welcome home, Mrs. Cole. Welcome to your life." Clara smiled, her heart full to bursting. She was home indeed, and her life, her real life, had just begun. The weeks following the wedding settled into a comfortable rhythm. Clara took over the main house, completely transforming it from a bachelor's quarters into a true home. She added curtains to the windows, rugs to the floors, and flowers to every room. The ranch hands teased Ethan about being domesticated, but they all appreciated the touches of comfort. Thomas Whitaker's trial was swift and decisive. He was sentenced to 3 years in territorial prison for fraud and attempted robbery. As the sheriff led him away, he'd looked at Clara with such venom that Ethan had stepped protectively in front of her. But Thomas was gone now, and with him the last shadow over their happiness. Winter came early that year, bringing unusual snow to the desert. Clara stood at the window one December morning, watching the white blanket transform the familiar landscape into something magical. Ethan's arms encircled her from behind his chin, resting on her head. "Regrets?" he asked softly. "About what?" "Coming west, marrying a rancher, living so far from civilization." Clara turned in his arms, reaching up to touch his face. "My only regret is that I didn't meet you sooner." He kissed her, then slow and deep, and Clara marveled again at how right this felt. She thought she was coming west for one life, and found another, entirely one filled with purpose, respect, and a love deeper than she'd imagined possible. "The men are waiting for breakfast," she murmured against his lips. "Let them wait," Ethan replied, pulling her closer. "I need another moment with my wife." Clara smiled, melting into his embrace. She'd been rejected, abandoned, and humiliated. But from that lowest point had come her greatest triumph. She was Clara Cole now, mistress of the Double C Ranch, beloved wife, and respected member of the community. The woman who'd stood on that train platform with nothing but $12 and wounded pride had transformed into someone she hardly recognized, someone strong, confident, and deeply loved. The snow melted within days, leaving the desert refreshed and green with unexpected growth. Clara discovered she was with child in late January, the discovery coming as she stood over the wash basin one morning, dizzy and nauseated. Martha confirmed her suspicions that afternoon, having driven out from town with supplies. "About 3 months along, I'd say," Martha pronounced after her examination. "You'll have a summer baby." Clara sat on the edge of the bed, her hand pressed to her still flat stomach in wonder. "I need to tell Ethan." "He's going to be over the moon," Martha predicted. "That man looks at you like you hung the stars. A baby will just about complete his happiness." But Clara felt a flutter of nervousness as she waited for Ethan to return from the range that evening. They'd never discussed children specifically, though she'd assumed they would come eventually. What if he wasn't ready? What if the ranch couldn't support a growing family? She was sitting by the fire when he came in, dusty and tired from moving cattle to fresh pasture. His face lit up when he saw her, as it always did, and Clara's heart swelled with love. "You look serious," he said, kissing her forehead before sinking into the chair beside her. "Everything all right?" "Martha came by today." "Is she well?" "She is. She examined me." Clara took a breath. "Ethan, I'm going to have a baby." For a moment he went completely still, his eyes widening. Then he was out of his chair and on his knees before her, his hands gentle on her stomach. "A baby. His voice was reverent. Our baby. Due in summer, Martha thinks. July, maybe. Clara covered his hands with hers. Are you happy? Happy. Ethan looked up at her and she saw tears in his eyes. Clara, you've given me everything I never knew I wanted. First yourself, now this. Happy doesn't begin to cover it. He pulled her down into his arms, holding her like she was made of spun glass. A baby, he kept repeating. We're having a baby. The ranch hands reacted to the news with almost as much enthusiasm as Ethan. Jake immediately started planning additions to the house, while Miguel began carving a wooden rattle. Tommy stammered his congratulations and promptly tripped over his own feet, and Red declared he'd teach the child to ride before it could walk. It might be a girl, Clara pointed out, amused by their assumptions. Even better, Jake said. A little girl who looks like her mama. She'll have every cowboy in the territory wrapped around her finger. As winter gave way to spring, Clara's body changed her belly, rounding beneath her dresses. Ethan was tender to the point of ridiculousness, trying to prevent her from lifting anything heavier than a coffee pot. Clara bore it with patience, understanding that his protectiveness came from love and perhaps a little fear. I'm not made of porcelain, she told him one April morning as he tried to carry the laundry basket for her. No, but you're carrying our child. Let me help. You have a ranch to run. The ranch can wait. You can't. He took the basket anyway, and Clara gave up arguing. Truth be told, she was more tired than usual, and the morning sickness that was supposed to end after 3 months had persisted. It was during a particularly bad bout of morning sickness in May that Clara heard horses approaching at a gallop. She looked out the window to see several riders she didn't recognize, led by a man in an expensive suit. Her stomach dropped as she recognized the type of lawyer or government official bearing news that was rarely good. Ethan emerged from the barn, Jake and the other hands flanking him. Clara watched from the window as the suited man dismounted and handed Ethan a paper. Even from a distance, she could see her husband's shoulders tense. She was waiting on the porch when Ethan approached the paper crumpled in his fist. What is it? She asked. Thomas Whitaker is dead. His voice was flat. Killed in a prison fight 2 weeks ago. Clara felt nothing at first, then a wave of relief so intense it made her knees weak. Dead? His lawyer is here about his will. Ethan's jaw clenched. Apparently Thomas left something to you. To me? Clara couldn't hide her shock. Why would he leave me anything? I don't know, but the lawyer insists on speaking with you. The lawyer, a thin man named Harrison, sat in their parlor, looking uncomfortable. Mrs. Cole, I understand this must be surprising. Mr. Whitaker changed his will shortly before his incident. He left you this letter and a small bequest. Clara took the letter with trembling hands, breaking the seal. Thomas's handwriting sprawled across the page. Clara, by the time you read this, I will be dead. Prison has given me time to think, to recognize the man I became. I was cruel to you not because of any failing on your part, but because of my own inadequacy. You were too good for me, too strong, too real. I wanted a doll, and you were a woman. I see now that Cole is the man you deserved from the start. I leave you the sum of $5,000, the inheritance from my mother that I never earned the right to spend. Use it to build the life you deserve. I'm sorry for the pain I caused. Thomas Whitaker. Clara read it twice, then handed it to Ethan. His face went through several expressions as he read anger, surprise, and finally a grudging respect. $5,000, he said quietly. That's a fortune. I don't want his money, Clara said immediately. It's not his anymore, Harrison interjected. It's yours legally and morally. He wanted to make amends, Mrs. Cole. Perhaps you should let him. After Harrison left, Clara and Ethan sat in silence, the weight of Thomas's letter between them. What do you want to do? Ethan finally asked. I don't know. It feels wrong to profit from his death. He profited from your pain. Maybe this is justice balancing the scales. Ethan took her hand. We could do a lot with $5,000. Expand the ranch, secure our children's future. Children? Clara smiled slightly. Already planning for more. As many as you'll give me. He pulled her onto his lap, his hand gentle on her rounded belly. But seriously, Clara, This money could change everything. We could buy the Hendricks place that borders ours, double our grazing land. Clara considered this. The money that had come from cruelty could be transformed into something good, something lasting. All right, she decided. But I want to send something to Thomas's family, too. His sister wrote to me once apologizing for his behavior. She has children. You're too good, Ethan murmured, kissing her temple. But that's one of the reasons I love you. The purchase of the Hendricks Ranch was completed by early June, just as Clara entered her final month of pregnancy. The expansion meant hiring more hands, and Jake recommended his nephew, a young man named Daniel, who had experience with cattle and a gift with horses. We're building something real here, Ethan said one evening as they stood on the porch looking out over their expanded domain. Something that will last generations. Clara leaned against him, her hand on her belly where their child kicked vigorously. Our children will grow up here, learn the land like you did. And they'll be educated like you were, Ethan added. Best of both worlds. The first pains came just after dawn on July 15th, starting as a low backache that Clara initially dismissed. But as the morning progressed, they intensified, coming in waves that made her grip the kitchen counter. Clara. Ethan appeared in the doorway, his face immediately concerned. What's wrong? I think the baby's coming. The controlled chaos that followed would have been amusing if Clara hadn't been in increasing pain. Ethan sent Tommy racing to town for Martha, while Jake boiled water and the other hands paced nervously outside. Ethan never left her side, letting her squeeze his hand through each contraction, whispering encouragement and love. Martha arrived in record time, taking charge with an efficiency that calmed everyone. Baby's in a hurry, she announced after examining Clara. Won't be long now. It was the hardest thing Clara had ever done, but also the most miraculous. As the sun reached its peak, their daughter entered the world with a lusty cry that brought tears to Ethan's eyes. A girl, Martha announced, placing the baby in Clara's arms. Perfect and healthy. Clara looked down at the tiny face, already seeing Ethan's strong features softened by her own genes. She's beautiful. Like her mother, Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion. He touched the baby's cheek with one trembling finger. What should we name her? Grace, Clara said without hesitation. Grace Elizabeth Cole. Because that's what she is, Grace, after everything we've been through. The ranch hands were allowed in one at a time to meet the newest member of the Double C family. Jake brought a tiny pair of boots he'd been hiding. Miguel presented a beautifully carved cradle, and even Tough Red had tears in his eyes as he looked at the baby. She's so small, Tommy whispered, afraid to come too close. She'll grow, Clara assured him, and she'll need all of you to watch over her. That's a promise, ma'am, Jake said for all of them. Little Grace has got herself a whole ranch full of protectors. The months that followed were a blur of feedings and diapers, first smiles, and sleepless nights. Clara had never been happier even when exhausted. Ethan was a devoted father, walking the floors with Grace when she was fussy, singing to her in his rough voice that somehow always soothed her. You're spoiling her, Clara said one evening, finding him in the rocking chair with Grace asleep on his chest. Impossible to spoil something already perfect, he replied, not opening his eyes. Clara kissed his forehead, then the baby's. I love you both so much, it frightens me sometimes. Nothing to be frightened of. We're not going anywhere. As autumn returned to the desert, bringing its palette of gold and rust, Clara stood in her garden, Grace in a sling across her chest, directing the hands and harvesting the vegetables she'd grown. The garden had tripled in size since her arrival, now providing fresh produce not just for the ranch but for sale in town. Mrs. Cole, you've got visitors, Daniel called from the gate. Clara turned to see an elegant carriage approaching out of place on the rough ranch road. As it drew closer, she recognized the woman stepping down Thomas Whitaker's sister Margaret, whom she'd only seen in photographs. Mrs. Cole, Margaret said formally. Then her composure cracked. Clara, I had to come. To thank you. Thank me. For the money you sent. You didn't have to do that. After everything Thomas did. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. Your generosity saved us. My husband had invested poorly. We were facing ruin. Your gift gave us a fresh start. Clara shifted Grace to one arm and took Margaret's hand with the other. Thomas's letter said he wanted to make amends. I thought you should be part of that. Margaret looked at the baby. Your daughter, Grace, she's 3 months old. She's beautiful. You're living the life Thomas promised you, but better because you chose it yourself. Margaret squeezed Clara's hand. I won't stay long. I just needed you to know that not all the Whitakers are like my brother was, and I needed to apologize again for his behavior. No apology necessary. Without his rejection, I wouldn't have found Ethan. In a strange way, Thomas gave me everything by taking everything away. After Margaret left, Clara found Ethan in the corral working with a new horse. He looked up as she approached with Grace. Everything all right? Perfect, Clara said, and meant it. Absolutely perfect. That evening, as was becoming their tradition, the entire ranch gathered for dinner in the main house. Clara had insisted on it once a week, saying that families should eat together. The long table was full of laughter and conversation. Grace passed from arm to arm, everyone competing to make her smile. Remember when you first arrived, Jake said to Clara, scared as a rabbit but trying not to show it. I wasn't scared, Clara protested. You were, Ethan said, grinning, but you were also brave. Bravest thing I ever saw, you standing on that platform with your chin up after being humiliated. And now look, Miguel gestured around the table. Mistress of all you survey. Mistress of a bunch of cowboys who track mud through my clean floors, Clara corrected, but she was smiling. You love us anyway, Red said confidently. I do, Clara admitted. Every one of you. Later, after the hands had returned to the bunkhouse and Grace was sleeping in her cradle, Clara and Ethan sat on the porch swing watching the stars emerge in the clear desert sky. Do you ever think about how different life could have been? Ethan asked. If Thomas hadn't rejected you, never, Clara said firmly, that life was never real. It was a fantasy built on lies and expectations. This life, our life, is real. Even when it's hard, even when the cattle prices drop or the weather doesn't cooperate or Grace keeps us up all night. Especially then, the hard times make the good times sweeter. Clara took his hand, placing it on her stomach. Besides, we'll need to be strong for what's coming. Ethan went still. Clara. Martha confirmed it today. Grace is going to have a sibling come spring. Ethan's whoop of joy echoed across the ranch, bringing faces to the bunkhouse windows. He swept Clara into his arms, spinning her around until she was breathless with laughter. Another baby. You need to stop doing that every time I tell you I'm pregnant, Clara said. But she was laughing too. Never. Each child is a miracle proof that we're building something lasting. He set her down gently, his hands framing her face. I love you, Clara Cole. Love you more than I thought possible. And I love you, Ethan Cole. My rescuer, my husband, my everything. I didn't rescue you, Ethan said seriously. You rescued yourself. I just offered you a place to land. The sound of Grace crying drew them inside, but Clara paused at the door, looking back at the vast expanse of land that had become her world. 2 years ago, she'd arrived here with nothing but wounded pride and desperate hope. Now she had everything: a husband who cherished her, a daughter who delighted her, another child on the way, and an extended family of rough cowboys who would do anything for her. Thomas Whitaker had thought he was destroying her when he sent that telegram. Instead, he'd freed her to find her true path, her true self, her true love. The rejection that had seemed like an ending had actually been a beginning. As she went to tend to her daughter, Clara could hear Ethan already planning with excitement about the new baby, talking about adding more rooms to the house, maybe hiring a tutor when the children were older, ensuring they had every opportunity to succeed. We'll teach them everything, he was saying. How to work the land, how to read the stars, how to judge cattle and people. They'll be educated like their mother and tough like their father. They'll be themselves, Clara corrected, lifting Grace from her cradle. Unique and wonderful and loved beyond measure. The baby settled against her chest with a contented sigh, and Clara felt that familiar wave of completeness wash over her. This was her life now, not the one she'd planned, not the one society expected, but the one she'd chosen and fought for. Through the window, she could see the lights of Copper Creek in the distance, the town where her humiliation had turned into triumph. Tomorrow she would go to town for supplies, and people would tip their hats to Mrs. Cole, the respected rancher's wife who had turned rejection into victory. But tonight she was simply Clara holding her daughter while her husband planned their future and their adopted family of cowboys played cards in the bunkhouse. Tonight, she was exactly where she belonged. The spring baby arrived right on schedule, a boy they named James after Jake, who had become like a grandfather to their children. The ranch continued to prosper. The family grew, and the story of the rejected bride who became the queen of the Double C Ranch passed into local legend. Years later, when Grace was old enough to understand, she would ask her mother about the man who had rejected her, the one whose cruelty had inadvertently led to their family's happiness. He was a small man who couldn't see past his own expectations, Clara would tell her daughter. But his blindness became our blessing. Sometimes, my darling, the worst things that happen to us lead to the best things. You just have to be brave enough to keep walking until you find where you're meant to be. And Grace would nod, understanding already that her mother was the bravest woman she knew, the one who had taken rejection and transformed it into triumph, who had found love not in spite of loss, but because of it. The Double C Ranch stood as testament to that transformation, its buildings strong and permanent against the desert landscape, its pastures green with careful tending, its heart warm with the love of the family that called it home. Clara had come to Arizona to marry one man and ended up creating a dynasty with another, proving that sometimes the life we plan pales in comparison to the life that chooses us. As she stood on the porch one evening, her children playing at her feet, while Ethan rode in from the range, Clara thought about writing a letter to Thomas's grave, thanking him for the rejection that had saved her life. But then Grace tugged at her skirt, wanting attention, and James needed feeding, and Ethan was dismounting with that smile that still made her heart race, and Clara realized no letter was necessary. Her life, her happiness, her family. They were thanks enough. The years that followed seemed to pass in a golden haze of prosperity and growth. James grew into a sturdy toddler with his father's sage honey eyes and his mother's determined chin, while Grace developed into a precocious child who could already read at 4 years old and rode her pony with the confidence of someone twice her age. Clara watched her children flourish on the ranch. Understanding now that the life she was giving them, one of honest work education and boundless love, was worth more than any society position Thomas Whitaker could have offered. It was a morning in late spring, 5 years after Clara's arrival at the Double C, when everything changed again. She was in the kitchen preparing breakfast, James on her hip and Grace helping to set the table, when Jake burst through the door, his weathered face pale with urgency. "Mrs. Cole, we got trouble. Big trouble." Clara set James in his high chair, her stomach tightening. "What kind of trouble?" "Railroad company. They're here with papers saying they got rights to run tracks right through our best grazing land. Got a federal marshal with them to enforce it." Through the window, Clara could see a group of men in city suits standing near the corral, their presence as foreign to the ranch as snow in July. Ethan was already there, the ledger under his arm, his stance rigid with controlled anger. She recognized that particular set to his shoulders. He was fighting to maintain his composure. "Grace, watch your brother," Clara instructed, already untying her apron. "Jake, tell me exactly what they're claiming." As Jake explained, Clara's mind raced through the implications. The Atlantic and Pacific Railroad wanted to run a new line to connect Copper Creek with the larger markets in Phoenix and beyond. The proposed route would cut directly through the Double C's water access and best pasture land, the very heart of their operation. "They're offering compensation," Jake said grimly, "but it's pennies on the dollar for what that land's worth to us. Without access to Cedar Creek, we'd lose half the herd come drought season." Clara smoothed her hair, straightened her dress, and walked out to meet the threat to her family's future. The men turned as she approached, several of them dismissing her immediately as just the rancher's wife. They would learn differently soon enough. "Gentlemen," she said crisply, "I'm Clara Cole. I understand you're attempting to steal our land under the guise of eminent domain." The lead man, a narrow-faced fellow with pomaded hair that reminded her unpleasantly of Thomas, sniffed disdainfully. "Madam, this is a matter of business. Perhaps you should return to your kitchen while the men discuss." "The kitchen can wait, Mr. Harriman, Chester Harriman, Chief Acquisitions Officer for the Atlantic and Pacific Railroad." "Well, Mr. Harriman." This ranch is run jointly by my husband and myself. Every major decision requires both our approvals, and I can tell you right now that no railroad will be crossing our water access." Harriman's face reddened. "The federal government has granted us the right of passage. Your approval is not required." "May I see these federal papers?" Clara extended her hand, her tone suggesting it wasn't really a request. Harriman reluctantly handed over a sheaf of documents. Clara studied them carefully, her education serving her well as she parsed the legal language. There a discrepancy in the land survey dates and another in the boundary descriptions. "These surveys are from 1878, she said slowly. "Before the Hendricks purchase was incorporated into our holdings. Your proposed route is based on outdated information." "A technicality. The law is built on technicalities, Mr. Harriman." Clara handed the papers to Ethan. "Furthermore, you failed to properly notify us of the survey period, which violates Federal Statute 314, subsection 8 of the Railroad Expansion Act." Harriman blinked. "How could you possibly know?" "I make it my business to know anything that might affect my family's future." Clara had spent the past 2 years studying every law book she could order from San Francisco, preparing for exactly this sort of challenge. "You'll need to resurvey, provide proper notification, and compensate us at fair market value, which I assure you is far more than the insulting sum you've offered. We have the federal marshal, who can only enforce legal orders," Clara interrupted, turning to the marshal. "Sir, I assume you've reviewed these documents yourself." The marshal, a younger man who looked uncomfortable with the whole situation, shifted his weight. "Well, ma'am, I was told they were in order, but you didn't verify them yourself. You took Mr. Harriman's word." Clara's voice was gentle but firm. "I think you'll find if you check with the Federal Land Office that these documents are not just outdated, but potentially fraudulent." "That's a serious accusation," Harriman sputtered. "Yes, it is. Shall we telegram the federal office now to confirm? I'm sure they'd be very interested to know the Atlantic and Pacific Railroad is attempting to use 5-year-old surveys to justify land seizure." Ethan stepped forward, his presence adding weight to Clara's words. "My wife is right. You can leave now and come back with proper documentation, or we can make this a federal case. Your choice, Harriman." The railroad man's face cycled through several shades of red before settling on a mottled purple. "This isn't over, Cole. The railroad will come through one way or another." "Maybe," Ethan said evenly, "but not today, and not without a fight." After the delegation left dust from their carriages still hanging in the air, the ranch hands gathered around Clara and Ethan, their faces showing a mixture of relief and concern. "You did it, Mrs. Cole," Tommy said admiringly. "Sent them packing with their tails between their legs." "It's a temporary victory," Clara cautioned. "They'll be back with better lawyers and proper documentation. We need to prepare." That evening, after the children were asleep, Clara and Ethan sat in his study maps and legal books spread across the desk. The lamplight cast shadows on their faces as they worked plotting strategy like generals preparing for war. "We could hire a lawyer from Phoenix," Ethan suggested, "someone who knows railroad law." "We could, but I have a better idea." Clara pulled out a letter she'd received weeks ago but hadn't mentioned. "Do you remember Mary Stewart?" "She was Mary Johnson before she married." "Your predecessor here, the housekeeper who married the Tucson merchant." "Yes, but her husband died last year. She's been studying law. Apparently, he encouraged her education. She's not a formal lawyer. Women can't be admitted to the bar yet, but she knows more about property law than most men with degrees." Ethan leaned back in his chair, a slow smile spreading across his face. "You want to bring her here?" "She needs work. We need expertise. And having another woman who understands both ranch life and legal matters." Clara shrugged. "It seems providential." "Write to her tomorrow. Offer her whatever salary she needs." Mary Stewart arrived 2 weeks later, a handsome woman in her 30s with intelligent eyes and an air of quiet confidence. Grace took to her immediately, and even shy James warmed to her within days. But more importantly, she brought with her a wealth of legal knowledge and a sharp mind that immediately grasped the situation. "The railroad's problem," Mary explained over dinner one evening, "is that they need not just passage rights, but water rights. The Cedar Creek water rights were established by Spanish land grant 300 years ago and transferred with the property. They can't take those without compensation that reflects their true value. How much are we talking about? Jake asked. Based on comparable sales and the increasing cattle prices, Bob. Mary did quick calculations. At least $50,000, possibly more. The room went silent. It was an astronomical sum, more than the railroad would ever willingly pay. So they'll try to force us out another way, Shes, Ethan said grimly. Likely, Mary agreed. But forewarned is forearmed. The railroad's next move came sooner than expected. Within a month, strange things began happening at the Double C. Fences were cut in the night, allowing cattle to wander. Water troughs were contaminated with dead animals. One morning, they woke to find threatening messages painted on the barn, "Sell or burn." "We should contact the sheriff," Clara said, staring at the ugly red letters. "Sheriff's in the railroad's pocket," Jake said bluntly. "Has been since they started throwing money around town." "Then we protect ourselves," Ethan decided. "Double the night watches, arm everyone, and make it clear we won't be intimidated." But the harassment escalated. Supply wagons were mysteriously delayed or diverted. The bank, under pressure from railroad investors, called in a loan earlier than scheduled. When Clara went to town, she found previously friendly merchants suddenly cold, reluctant to do business. "They're trying to isolate us," she told Ethan one evening as she treated a cut on his hand he'd been repairing fence all day after another midnight vandalism. "Let them try. We've faced worse." "Have we?" Clara couldn't hide her worry. This isn't one bitter man like Thomas. This is a corporation with unlimited resources and government backing. Ethan pulled her onto his lap, his arms strong around her. "Hey, remember what you told Grace. Sometimes the worst things lead to the best. We'll find a way through this." The turning point came unexpectedly. Clara was in town with Mary negotiating for supplies from one of the few merchants still willing to deal with them when she overheard a conversation in the next aisle. "Harriman's getting desperate," a man's voice said. "The board's breathing down his neck about the delays. If he can't secure the route by month's end, they're replacing him." "Good," another voice replied. "Man's a crook. You hear what he did in Colorado, forged land documents, bribed judges. There's warrants out for him there." Clara and Mary exchanged glances, then quickly completed their purchases. Back at the ranch, Mary immediately began composing telegrams to her contacts in Colorado, while Clara wrote to newspapers in Phoenix and San Francisco. "If we can expose Harriman's past, it might be enough to make the railroad back off," Mary explained. "They can't afford the scandal." Within a week, their telegrams bore fruit. A lawyer from Denver arrived with documentation of Harriman's fraudulent activities, and a reporter from the San Francisco Chronicle came to investigate the story of a small ranch standing up to railroad corruption. The article that followed was devastating to Harriman and the railroad. "David versus Goliath in Arizona Territory," read the headline with a detailed account of the harassment, the forged documents, and Harriman's checkered past. Clara was quoted extensively, her words painting a picture of American families fighting for their rights against corporate greed. Public opinion shifted overnight. Letters of support poured in from across the territory and beyond. Other ranchers who'd been similarly pressured came forward. The governor himself issued a statement about investigating railroad practices. Harriman was recalled to San Francisco in disgrace, and a new negotiator arrived, a woman surprisingly named Elizabeth Thornton, who approached the situation entirely differently. "Mrs. Cole," she said at their first meeting, "I've read about you. A woman who transformed rejection into triumph, who built a partnership with her husband rather than accepting a subordinate role. I respect that." "Thank you, Miss Thornton, but respect won't make us give up our water rights." "No, but fair compensation might." Elizabeth spread out new maps. "What if we rerouted 5 miles south? We'd avoid your water access entirely. The railroad would pay you for passage rights across your southern boundary, non-critical land, and provide permanent shipping contracts for your cattle at preferred rates." It was a reasonable offer, more than reasonable. Clara looked at Ethan, seeing her own thoughts reflected in his eyes. "We'll need to see the contracts," Clara said, "and we want guarantees about employment for local men in the railroad construction and operation." "Done," Elizabeth smiled. "I had a feeling you'd be thinking about the broader community, not just your own interests." The negotiations took another month, but in the end, the Double C emerged not just intact, but stronger. The railroad payment allowed them to expand further, buying additional land and investing in better breeding stock. The shipping contracts guaranteed profitable sales for years to come. "You did it," Ethan said one evening as they watched the first railroad construction crews working on the southern boundary far from their water and best grazing land. "You saved us." "We did it," Clara corrected. "Together, with help from family." She gestured toward the bunkhouse where Jake and the hands were celebrating and to the house where Mary was teaching Grace her letters while holding James on her lap. "Still, if you hadn't known about those legal statutes, if you hadn't studied all those law books, if you hadn't given me a chance when I was a rejected bride with nowhere to go," Clara countered. "We could play if all night, Ethan. The truth is we're a team. We always have been from that first day at the depot." He kissed her, then deep and passionate despite being in full view of anyone who might look. "I love you, Clara Cole. More every day, which I didn't think was possible. Even when I'm being difficult and insisting on checking every contract 3 times. Especially then. Your thoroughness saved our ranch." That night there was a celebration at the Double C. The whole community came bringing food and music and goodwill. Even some who'd shunned them during the railroad pressure came to apologize and celebrate their victory. Clara stood on the porch watching couples dance in the yard lit by lanterns, children racing between the adults' legs, her own children being passed from arm to arm by their extended family of cowboys. Mary was dancing with Daniel Jake's nephew, and Clara made a mental note to watch that development with interest. "You're thinking something," Ethan said, appearing beside her with 2 glasses of punch. "I'm thinking about cycles, how Thomas's rejection led me to you, how his death provided the money to expand the ranch, how that expansion made us important enough for the railroad to notice how fighting the railroad made us stronger and more prosperous than ever. Everything connected, everything leading to this," Clara gestured at the celebration, "to family community belonging. 5 years ago I stood on a train platform with nothing. Now you have everything." Clara turned to look at her husband, still handsome, still strong, still looking at her like she hung the moon. "Now I have more than everything. I have a life I chose built with my own hands and heart. I have children who will grow up knowing they can be whatever they choose. I have a husband who sees me as an equal partner. I have a home that no one can take away." "And you have another baby on the way," Ethan said quietly, his hand going to her still flat stomach. "Unless I'm misreading the signs." Clara's eyes widened. "How did you know I only just realized myself yesterday?" 5 years of marriage teaches a man to notice things. The way you've been tired lately, turning green at the smell of coffee." He grinned. "Besides, Jake's been taking bets on when we'd have another. He's going to be impossible when he finds out he won. You're happy. Clara, every child you give me is a gift. Every day with you is a gift." He pulled her close. "Though we might need to build another addition to the house. Or finally build that school we've been talking about. Our children will need proper education, and so will the other ranch children as the area grows. Already planning, I see. Always. That's what partners do." As the celebration continued around them, Clara reflected on the journey that had brought her here. The rejection at the depot had been the catalyst for everything: her marriage, her children, her growth into a woman of business and law, as well as heart and home. Thomas Whitaker had meant to diminish her, but instead had freed her to become more than she'd ever imagined possible. "Dance with me," Ethan said suddenly, pulling her toward the yard where the musicians were playing a slow waltz. "Ethan, I should check on the children." "The children are fine. Dance with your husband, Clara. Let everyone see that the rejected bride has become the beloved wife." They danced under the stars, the same stars that had witnessed their first dance as a courting couple, their wedding, the birth of their children, their victory over the railroad. Around them, their community celebrated, but Clara was aware only of Ethan's arms around her, the solid warmth of his chest, the steady beat of his heart. "No regrets?" he asked, echoing his question from months ago. "Only one," Clara said. He pulled back, concerned. "What?" "I regret that I can't go back and tell that terrified woman on the train platform that everything would work out better than her wildest dreams." Ethan laughed, spinning her around. "She wouldn't have believed you anyway." "No," Clara agreed. "She had to live it to believe it." As the music ended and another song began, Grace ran up to them, her face bright with excitement. "Mama, Papa, dance with me." They each took one of her hands, creating a circle of three. Then James toddled over, and Ethan scooped him up, making it four. They danced like that, a family complete and growing, surrounded by their chosen family of cowboys and friends. The railroad would come through as planned, bringing prosperity and connection to the wider world. The Double C would continue to grow and thrive. There would be challenges ahead, droughts and floods, market fluctuations, and family struggles. But Clara faced them all without fear because she had learned the greatest truth of her life, that rejection could become redemption, that loss could become gain, that a woman with courage and determination could build a life beyond society's expectations. The rejected bride had become so much more wife, mother, business partner, community leader. But most importantly, she had become herself fully and completely without apology or compromise. As the evening wound down and guests began departing, Clara stood once more on the porch, her hand resting on her belly where new life grew. The ranch spread out before her in the moonlight, the houses, the barns, the corrals, the vast pastures that would sustain their growing family for generations to come. "Ready for bed?" Ethan asked James, asleep in his arms, Grace leaning sleepily against his leg. "In a moment," Clara said. "I just want to remember this. All of it. It's not ending, you know. This is just another beginning." "I know." Clara smiled, thinking of the baby within her, the school they would build, the years ahead full of promise and purpose. "That's what I want to remember, that there's always another beginning." She followed her family into the house, pausing at the threshold to look back once more. Somewhere out there, perhaps, was another woman facing rejection, standing on her own metaphorical train platform with her world crashing down. Clara whispered a prayer for her, whoever she was, that she too would find her unexpected path to happiness. Then she went inside, closing the door on the night, but not on the memories. In the morning, there would be breakfast to cook children, to tend ranch business, to manage a new life to plan for. But tonight she would lie in her husband's arms and marvel at the journey that had brought her from humiliation to triumph, from solitude to belonging, from rejection to a love deeper than she'd ever dreamed possible. The Double C Ranch stood solid and enduring in the desert night, a testament to what could be built from the ashes of disappointment. And at its heart, Clara Jennings, once a rejected bride with nowhere to go, had found not just a home but a destiny she'd never dared imagine.